Okay.
without the influence from the outside.
Uh-huh.
Is that what it means, Father?
Yes, it is something, his assumption is actually against heteronomy, which means a law coming from outside, because it is something, the law is already somehow written in the human heart, and especially in the goodwill that we have, and that as a thinking subject, we are able precisely to appreciate that, okay, on our own as a rational subject. And that is the reason why you have to be able to, I mean, that forms part of the kingdom of ends, no, that he talks about. And he speaks about pure reason. Yeah? You remember our discussion on John Rawls, okay, who articulates Kantian perspective in our time, that religious, ethics are pushed away in the margins because what they present actually could be coming from the specificity of their tradition, normally drawn from their appreciation of an external rule like revelation. And he claims that that kind of fake morality will confuse people. So you have to rely mainly on the religion of pure reason, pure rationality, that you are not affected by anything, but it's actually drawn from within you as a human person. That's why he calls this pure rationality. Of course, he also talk about practical rationality in another work that he published. But what we draw from the internal disposition that you get, okay, is something that is autonomously pursued. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay,
Yes, Father. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Now we move on because we don't have enough time. Okay, another set of what we would refer to as another moral system that makes people justify morally or ethically pursue in terms of their rationality what is right and what is good is actually what has emerged from the question, are the consequences of actions are good? You know very well, even in the Bible, it speaks about, the need to be able to know whether something is good or bad on the basis of the consequences, because you know the tree by its fruits. Some days ago, that was the gospel all about, isn't it? So you're able to determine whether what you have done is good or bad on the basis of the consequences or on the fruits it bear in your life. It bears in your life. Okay, and here one group of this is a one system of ethical rationality. Okay, that had its roots in Greek philosophy. Okay, you call this utilitarian ethics. The classical version of this is hedonistic philosophy, okay, or ethics, okay, one that celebrates pleasure and gets rid of pain in our life. But that is what utilitarian ethics is really all about. It was developed by Jeremy Bentham. These are English, thinkers in the modern times. John Stuart Mill as well. Okay, what do they say? Okay, utilitarian ethics is really about consequences of what happens in our life as we are able to follow, okay, what is good, the determination of whether or not one thing that we do, not one thing that we legislate, programs that we propose is heavily based on whether or not they actually bring about good results that make people happy. Jeremy Bentham, okay, was the one who developed this in modern times, and he says that whatever he was a legislator, by the way, in England. Okay, and as a legislator, you will have to be able to determine whether what you actually come up in terms of laws is good or bad. And the whole basis for saying that it is good or it is bad is whether they actually give way to very good consequences or very bad consequences, okay, respectively. Okay. And here, the the consequences will have to bear it out in whether or not what you do and what you legislate or what programs you come up with is having its effects on whether it is maximizing the good or pleasure for the greatest number of people and minimizing pain. Drawing from a Greek philosophical system of hedonism, the fundamental, reality of life is the presence of pain on the one hand and the presence of pleasure. And our task is to make sure that we maximize pleasure and that we eliminate pain in our life. Okay? Do you agree with that? Okay, you maximize pleasure. And here, uh, people are asked, okay, like for example, in a statistic today, for example, do you agree with President Duterte? So, what is the pleasure of people about his governance? If he, for example, a lot of people give approval to him, you know, legislators will support him. You understand? So, because it is about public opinion, about whether or not they get satisfied, that satisfactory rating. Are they pleased with the government? Are they pleased with the programs of the government? Are they pleased with what Duterte is doing, etc.? And so apparently, basis of laws and basis to support, for example, of the legislative system is on consideration of that. Okay. So, for example, you come up with a program. Okay, let us talk about, bringing a white sand along Manila Bay, etc. Does that give way to a greater pleasure for a greater number of population or not? So statisticians probably would measure who are happy with that program and who are not happy about the program. And then you calculate this. And then when you say more people are saying they're happy, then you say it's good. When you say that many people are saying no, they're not happy with it, then you say that's bad. You understand? It's very much based on how it affects people's basic appreciation of this in terms of their own experience of pleasure. Okay? And that it eliminates some problems or pains, that may have to do with this particular project. Oh, there is a law. Okay, death penalty. Okay, Duterte is trying to impose death penalty. You come up with survey, and would people say we go for death penalty or we are against death penalty? When it becomes evident that it is the pleasure of as many people as you could count, okay, that they are in support of death penalty, people in Congress will just because they try to see public opinion in that regard. Okay, what is the pleasure of men or of people? Okay, the greater number of those who are pleased with it becomes the basis of whether or not it is good. Okay, and therefore you are able to maximize pleasure and then you minimize pain. Jeremy Bentham went as far as doing a calculation. He calls this felicity calculus. That's strange, but even the felicity calculus. Felicity is happiness, isn't it? Okay, pleasure. Okay, and you talk about calculating it. He calls that felicity calculus, like in a balance. You have to be able to measure how many people are pleased. Is it actually affecting and resulting to something good for as many people as possible? How intense is the pleasure? Is the pleasure panandalian o pamatagalan? Is the pleasure only for a moment, or is it something that would last? Okay, is the pleasure, how intense is the pleasure? Is the pleasure bringing you so much joy? Or it's a little pleasure, you know? And then you have to be able to prioritize it. It is good precisely because it is pleasing so many people and in a longer period of time and with a profound, intense experience of pleasure. So those are certain things that you're able to measure that would make you say that what you actually legislate, what you propose as a program of what you do is good or bad. You understand? Of course, some people were complaining, how come? What would be better? You know, a very satisfied pig, no, boar, pig, or a human being, okay, that would have a kind of another pleasure. Okay. You could actually be pleased carnally or physically, but you are not fully pleased, in your higher faculties. What is of a greater pleasure? Intellectual pleasure, when after doing your research, you're so happy and you say, oh, Eureka, I found my answer to my search. Wow. Is that a bigger pleasure than a pleasure that you actually get just from sleeping and eating a lot, etc.? Like, functioning like an animal, all that you're concerned about your own bodily considerations. So that question brought uh, John Stuart Mill to reconsider the fundamental theory of Jeremy Bentham. And he says that it is not about only quantitative pleasure. It is not only quantitative consideration of pleasure, but it is also has to do with qualifying what kind of pleasure do you really experience. Okay? So that really matters a lot. That pleasure of the spirit is much or far better than the pleasure that one gets from the physical needs, no? The meeting physical needs for that matter. And so John Stuart Mill developed what he refers to as qualitative sense of pleasure. Okay? So here, ultimately, we see that this is very operative in our society today. Okay? The whole discourse about common good and benevolence is an area where we see this becoming operative. Okay? The common good. Okay? But the common good here is defined in terms of putting together the selfish experience of individual satisfaction put together. You understand? So it's about the majority experience of what becomes good for the common. But it is a bit different from what common good is defined, especially how common good is defined in Catholic social tradition. Common good is not about my own personal satisfaction. Common good is what I see is going to be best not only for me, my consideration of my needs, but common good is in view of what is actually going to be really beneficial to us, to even to those in the margins, even to those who are actually minorities in society. It's not about majority consideration only, but it is about what is truly good for everyone without exception. You understand? Okay? So that's how particular uh, system of morality becomes operative in our society today. Do you agree with this? Do you see that it makes sense, or would you have any problem with it? Anyone?
I want to ask a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Can I
Name
So,
yourself.
ask the question.
Yes. I cannot see you. Name yourself. I'm sorry.
Alvin, Father.
You know? Who?
Chanvin, Father.
Alvin. Go ahead.
Alvin.
Go ahead. What's your
Alvin.
question? Marvin.
Regarding to the Alvin, Father, not Marvin, Alvin.
Sandin, wait a minute. I'm trying to look for your name.
Regarding to the pleasure that you said a while.
Yes. What about? I cannot hear you.
Sir. So,
A pleasure,
Alvin,
yes.
hello, Father.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Regarding to the pleasure that you said, because sometimes I think sometimes not all pleasures can bring us to that true.
No, you have become choppy again.
All pleasures to
No, we cannot get you. We cannot get you unless somebody explains to me what he was trying to ask. You know, this is the problem with this. No, I didn't get your question. You're choppy. Can you write your question in the chat box? I cannot get it. So if you have questions, by the way, you can always ask your questions through the chat box. Okay? Even as I talk, make comments on what you understand and what you appreciate. Then that gives me an idea whether you're able to follow or not. Okay? Make use of the instruments that are available to us. Would I be able to see the comments? Should that appear, I think, in my screen? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, can you write it? Or any other comment? Because I cannot hear the one who intervened. Yes, any other? Yes. So would you have any problem with this particular theory? By the way, in our contemporary society today, the most two prominent systems, moral systems, is utilitarianism and deontology. Normally, big ethicists now would speak of these two main systems operative in our many societies today, particularly of the liberal political systems. Okay, so any other comment? If not, then I will just continue, and then we will just reserve the questions later on. Please ask your questions in the chat box. Another moral system. Yes. Asan yung tanong? It's not appearing in my screen.
Galing kay Juan Vigano, Father.
Okay, what is the question?
Is it necessary that what is pleasurable will benefit for our happiness?
You know, the theories here actually would equate pleasure with happiness. Okay? Of course, that is exactly what John Stuart Mill eventually had to raise. Is the happiness or the pleasure that you talk about, is it of a lower kind, lower quality? Is it just, panandali ang happiness o panandali ang pleasure? Or is it something that is an authentic pleasure on the basis of the quality of that happiness that you speak about? Okay? Because it's just a question of, are people happy about it? Are people pleased with it or not? That is the same. Now, of course, people may have different appreciation of what it means to really be happy. And that is where you begin to make qualification of the quality, okay, of that happiness or pleasure that people experience. Okay? So that was the project of John Stuart Mill. Okay? That the kind of happiness that you experience is something that really is authentically, bringing real joy in your life as a person. Okay?
Father,
Yes.
from Thúc Nguyên, Father.
Yeah.
Yes, I just want to ask that, do you think that the pleasure sometimes be dangerous for our action? Because I think that pleasure allows sometimes allow serious emotional acts to take place.
Yeah. That's right. Actually, you are coming already from our Christian tradition that sometimes, have been affected by a certain disdain against pleasure. Okay? But, humanity at large would only make the basis for what they see is good on the basis of whether they are pleased with that. Of course, some people say, I'm pleased with sexual pleasure. Okay? But in reality, it destroys you precisely because you may actually have carnal pleasure, and yet this gives rise to some pain in your life because there are certain dimensions in your life that would also require that you feel a certain level of satisfaction, like experience of peace, tranquility of mind. And when you, for example, get into sexual pleasure, sometimes it disturbs your equanimity of mind, and therefore, for John Stuart Mill, your carnal pleasure, pursuit of carnal pleasure, becomes problematic. Do you understand? So it is actually subjected to a higher level of qualification of whether that pleasure is only meeting the lower dimension of your life, or is it actually meeting the higher quality of pleasure that you should be able to enjoy in your life. And of course, when John Stuart Mill begins to talk about qualification of pleasure, the next question that people ask is, but what makes you say that intellectual pleasure is more important than sexual pleasure? What makes you say, for example, that the pleasure of the spirit, that you are so inspired, that you're doing charity, is more important than having to be with a woman and enjoy her, etc. So, and there, according to John Stuart Mill, the response is people have a particular kind of intuition that makes him or her say that this pleasure is more important than the other pleasure. But the problem is when you begin to talk about intuitionism, then it becomes very subjective, isn't it? And that's the reason why, according to McIntyre, he actually criticizes this precisely because he says it cannot universally justify own claims because eventually, okay, the rational justification comes from another source, which is actually intuitionism. But intuitionism is almost amounting to subjectivism and relativism. That becomes problematic. You understand? Okay? So
Yes.
it depends on your own particular conditioning. Okay? Your own cultural background would tell you, oh, based on my experience, I come from a religious tradition. This kind of pleasure, going to mass, that place spiritually, is more important than having to go to the bars, and have women or enjoy my, having drinking spree. I opt for this higher pleasure. But according to McIntyre, that is already intuitionism. Okay? Because that already is moving away from the objectivity of that moral standard that initially was talking about measuring objectively. Okay? You know, the the, the merits of any particular form of life or action that one is able to do. So then you move from objective standard to something that becomes subjective standard, intuitionism. Do you understand? Okay,
Yes,
then we move on.
Father.
Another question that has been considered in the determination of what is right and what is wrong is actually whether or not, okay, the actions we do or the form of life that we've embraced is actually coming from a profound motivation that is acceptable. For example, here we talk about what is really more important. For example, you do charity, and yet the motivation is actually just to be able to brag about yourself. I'm bida, I'm great. The people will look up to me because I can do charity. I can make sacrifices and all that, and I want to have media covering, and then come up with all of these empires, okay? Trying to prove to people that I'm doing good. But your motivation is just to be able to make people believe that you are good externally and that you'll be able to gain votes during the next election. Okay? So that's a problem, isn't it? Okay? So your quality of your action somehow is being put into question precisely because of the kind of motivation you have for doing such. Do you understand? Or somebody, for example, apparently, hit somebody because he accidentally killed somebody, homicide. Of course, it will have to be investigated. The quality of the action in terms of responsibility and in terms of whether or not it is you will be judged and you will be punished is whether or not you have the motivation to kill the person. Okay? If your motivation is really killing the person that actually already murdered, it is not a simple homicide. Okay? But if, for example, that you are able to accidentally kill the person without the intention, then you don't have the motivation to do that, then there will be okay, less punishment that will be in a way imputed upon you. Okay? So motivations become very important. And this particular way of asking and framing the question has given rise to another moral system. You call this personalism. Okay, the personal reality of the person, the circumstances by which the person is able to make decisions. Okay, this is associated also with proportionalist ethics. Okay, because it takes into serious consideration what motivated the person to doing what he or she did. Okay, so motivation, love, intention, etc., are what really matters in any moral deliberation. Okay, this would qualify what you have done depends on the motivation or even love and intention that come along with what you've done. So here is the importance of having to do adequate consideration of the total reality of the human person. So you don't focus on the laws and whether or not people were able to do it, okay? But you focus on the person himself, okay, who is at stake at this very moment, okay? And be able to see and judge the person on the basis of his human total condition, which you should be able to adequately consider in your own moral deliberation, discernment, and judgment. Is that clear? Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
For example, okay, somebody, uh, for example, okay, before, for example, gays, LGBT are immediately judged on the basis of their immoral acts, on the basis of the objective evil that they do, okay? But now there is a greater space to be able to take a look at why have they become like that? What are their fundamental needs? From where they are coming? What is their historical background, etc.? You have to be able to assess the human person and be able to see and evaluate persons involved, for example, in a homosexual union, and say whether being in such union would even be lesser evil than having to have no faithful relationship in love, okay? some homosexuals from one bed to another every night, or at least several times during the month. But there are people who would like to stick it out, embracing fidelity, authentic love, self-giving, with the most profound intentions. And some people who find themselves in that reality, even if they seemingly live an unacceptable form of life, for some ethicists to begin, especially from the personalist perspective, they begin to see that there may be another way of evaluating that human condition, precisely because you judge them not on whether or not they follow the law, but you judge them on the basis of their capacity to become authentically good person, capable of loving, capable of best intention, capable of faithful, of fidelity, capable of many good things in a given relationship. So that changes everything together. So of course, do you agree with that? That becomes a very contentious thesis. Don't say that I'm taking that position. All I'm saying is that there is a new way of looking at certain realities on the basic consideration of the total condition of the person, and not purely on the basis of laws that are out there, not only on the basis of the natural law that have always been used to be able to evaluate such conduct, but it is on the basis of the internal disposition capacity of people involved in such form of life or such behaviors. Okay, so moral systems, in a way, it depends on the moral systems that you use that may give way to certain conclusions that you make in terms of your own moral discernment and evaluation of human conduct or a particular form of life, for that matter. Do you agree? Are you in agreement with me or not? Okay, let's finish first, and then we will have time for question and answer. Another particular moral system that has emerged, especially in more recent times, okay, comes from a fundamental question that asks, does the action help liberate oneself or others? And you call this liberation ethics. Liberation ethics comes from a particular horizon of experience where there is so much injustice, exclusion, and marginalization in society. There are some people who lament, and suffer precisely because of their condition brought about by certain systems and structures in society that push them against the wall of marginalization and poverty. Okay? When you begin to ask the question, what is really good to be done? And what is something bad about this? Of course, one particular moral theologian coming from Latin America, Moreno, would say the basis of our own evaluation of whether something is good or bad, human action is good or bad, is whether or not your action actually dominates other people. Okay? When your action, in a way, leads you to become oppressive to people, that's bad, because you actually step on people's dignity and the good things that he's supposed to be able to enjoy, you're able to prevent from happening. Okay? And the good thing is what would liberate the person out of that condition. Okay? Morality, therefore, is something that offers an alternative that makes a person, find new opening and possibilities for him or her to experience greater freedom in his life. Okay? Beginning to enjoy new opportunities, beginning to become an active participant in the development of society, in the curving of its own history, the people. Okay? So here at the center is the struggle for liberation through empowerment of the excluded toward justice and and social transformation. What is at the heart of liberative perspective of ethics is not so much about the I, the sub, but it is more about the other, who is excluded, who is marginalized, who is oppressed. And the moment you pay attention to the need of that other and that you take on the business of moving forward to liberating the person, then you're actually doing liberation ethics. And that is something that you're expected to do as a good, a moral system and moral actions that you need to pursue in your life. Is that clear?